How are we doing tonight? This is live training from Unity Technologies, and my name is Adam Buckner, one of the online live trainers that we have here, usually doing these Monday night slots, Monday nights at least in the UK. So today's session is about the 4.6 UI tools, and we're going to talk about resolution independence. We're actually going to be talking about resolution and device independence, a little bit on device independence. It didn't quite fit on the slide, so I didn't put it there. But we're going to touch primarily on resolution independence using the new UI tools, and we'll also talk about device independence. The first thing, I don't want to disappoint people, and I want to say, first of all, that there is no magic bullet. There is no simple one-click solution to becoming device or resolution independence. But there are a whole bunch of very good tools. Let's take a look at what we have here. This is Nightmares, and this is a slightly modified version of Nightmares. This is the slightly modified version of Nightmares that we did earlier in the year. As an introduction to the new UI tools in 4.6, which has the sort of shooter style or RPG style icons in the corners and the health bars. And then it has the pause menu, which we did also in a session, which has now been incorporated into the survival shooter project, which is up on the asset store. So you can get most of this from downloading it from the asset store, and I'll have a link to the specifics of the artwork and some of the things that we're doing specifically today that will be on the page when we put this up in the live training archive, which will be later this week. So, like I said, there's no magic bullet for becoming device independent or resolution independent, but there's some very good tools. And we'll be looking at those tonight. Now, complex UIs and many target resolutions and target devices may end up needing some specialized help and maybe some additional coding. And we'll touch on some of the things that you can do. We probably won't have time to go into any of that coding tonight, but we'll at least put you in the right direction. And what we'd like to do in today's session is do an introduction to resolution independence, talk about anchoring and how anchoring can help in some of the very first instances. I would also like to talk about one important component, which is the canvas scaler, I believe it's called now. At one point it was called reference resolution, but we've changed that to a slightly more useful, more descriptive name, which is the canvas scaler. And then we'll look at some additional options, which include some code directions, platform defines, and also the potential need to redesign your UI. I think it's important to remember that especially if you're looking at targeting both keyboard and mouse as input and touch as an input, that you may actually need to get a little bit more clever when dealing with that. And you may need to redesign your UI for those different platforms. So let's talk about the control of our aspect in our resolution. The very first place is going to be in the player settings. So let's bring Unity up here and take a look at our player settings. I find the easiest way to get there is to get the build settings, which is build settings here, and then click the player settings down here at the bottom, and that'll bring up our player settings. And so when we're dealing with, say, a web-based or standalone-based project, we can set our resolution. And here we have this one set to 1024 by 768. And when we see that in our game view, we can see that we have our free aspect. We have a number of suggested aspect ratios. And then we have the screen resolution that we've set in our player settings, which in this case is 1024 by 768. And if we change this, to say 900 by 600, we can see that the aspect ratio has changed. The aspect ratio hasn't changed, but the resolution has changed, and it's cutting out some of our UI. So I'm going to undo that and bring that back to 1024 by 768. And again, free aspect just simply fills, just so we can describe these, free aspect simply fills the window that we have, that we're working with. And then an aspect ratio will fill the window as best as possible, but stick to that aspect ratio. And then when we define a specific, we can set that in the menu. Now, if we're going into and we want to develop for multiple different types of aspect ratios, we look at our little list and we don't find the one that we're looking for. If we were to change build targets, we can do that. Bring up our build target. We can change our build targets to say iOS. and I can switch platforms. Now, one of the things I'd like to note is that I'm running cache server here. I'm downloading from the cache server. So the whole point of this was to show that now that I'm on iOS, we can see that we have all of these different build targets for the iPad and for the iPhone and the iPhone 4. But we don't have these when we are in our standalone. We have the standalone build size that we're setting. So anyway, so coming back, if we now look at our PC and Mac build, let's switch our platforms back again. It'll be a little bit quicker now that I've actually have cache server being happier. Okay, there we go. And if we go to our aspect ratios, we can see that we don't have those convenient ones that we want for our target device up here in the corner. But we can make more. And that's what this button is for, is we can add both aspect ratios and we can add fixed resolutions. So we can add an aspect ratio, let's say 2:3. Let's call that 2:3. And let's say this aspect ratio is going to be 2:3. And we can hit OK. And so now we have an aspect ratio that we can set. And this is not a resolution. This is an aspect ratio. It's just going to keep the sides to the height to the width in a 2:3 ratio. If we want to add a fixed resolution, we can also do that here. We can say that we want an iPad fixed resolution, and that's going to be 1024 by 768. And then we want to make another one called iPad. Oh dear, we've already used the word iPad. This is the whole point of editing it. And so let's make this one iPad portrait and make this one 768 by 1024. And if we want to go back and edit or delete these, it's a little bit obscure right now because there's only a plus button. There isn't a minus button. So you can come here and you can right click to edit or delete. So I'm right clicking and I can edit that, and I can call this one now iPad landscape. Okay. And then if I want to, I can delete that 2:3 aspect ratio that we aren't going to use. So that's how we can start to control the settings for our aspect ratio and our resolutions. We can set that in our build settings for our build target. If we don't have a build target that allows us to change our resolution, we can at least test for it here in the editor. We can create our own aspect ratios. We can create our own resolutions, and we can edit them so we can choose them. Now, the very first way of becoming device independent and resolution independent is anchoring. So we're going to be using this sort of 1024 by 768 size sort of as an example, which is roughly some monitors. It's the size of some iPads. It's a good aspect ratio for the game that we're using. So we're going to use that as an example. One of the problems that we have, which is that we change our resolution, and the UI no longer is visible or has way too much padding around it. In our case, because we're limiting this to our size, 1024 by 768, as opposed to free aspect, it always ends up not being any larger than it needs to be, so we don't end up with huge gaps around the outside. But if we were to do something like, say, keep the resolution the same but change the orientation, again, we've lost our icons. So the first thing we need to do is look at the anchoring system that we have inside Unity's 4.6. If we take a look at this in the scene view, and then now I'm in 2D mode, so I can look at my UI, and I'm backed way out. This is the game down here. If we look at one of the game, if we go zoom in on the player, he's way down here, and he's in 3D mode. Yay! And our canvas is way back up here, and we want to do that in 2D mode. And we're not going to go into great lengths about that. It's covered in other videos. But if we look at all of the material that we brought in, I'm going to ignore the screen fader and the damage image because they fill the screen. And so we're going to ignore those. But if we look at our hidden game over text, which is there in the middle, but it's just turned off. And then we look at our score. Let me just bring this up, put this into our rect tool, and our player icon. we're all anchored here in the center. All of these items are anchored to the center of the parent canvas. So the first thing that we can do is we can change our anchors. The anchor positions are based on these little guys here. And if they are together, they form a single point, and we will anchor our UI element to a single point. If they are separated from each other, we give stretching information to the UI, and the item that we have anchored will be stretched if the parent changes position. So right now, since everything is in the center, when we change our aspect ratio, we change our resolution, we change our orientation, and all of those items are going to be anchored to that middle, and so that's their relationship. So if we move this, and we can grab these, put that to the corner. Now this is the one element that's over in the corner, and we change our, go to our game, and change our orientation. We can see that one element is still in the corner, because it is anchored with a direct relationship between the anchor and the corner. So the four anchor positions, oops, come up here. These four anchor positions have a direct relationship to the four corners of the sprite. So the first thing we want to do is just simply go in and set the anchors for all of our items. I'm going to go back to our landscape version because it's going to be easier to do. And we can go ahead and set our anchors. Now we can drag them. If we say go to the enemy icon, same thing, we can drag that anchor over into the corner. And it's snapping. It snaps to the corner. There's good snapping tools. But we can also use the anchor presets button. So let's grab that score text that we have here. It's anchored to the center, and I can choose to anchor it to the top. I can go down to my health and ammo sliders, and I can do multi-select. I can select both of them, and I can set those both to the upper left-hand corner. And so now when I look at them individually, we can see that the anchor is up here in the upper left-hand corner. And the offset's different for these two. So you can see that the health slider and the ammo slider are both anchored in the upper left-hand corner, but they still maintain their position in the screen. And then that pause button, we want to throw that down to the lower left. And that should pretty much be everything. Oh, nope, we've got this guy here. So we got to put him up in the corner as well. So now if we buzz through this, we've got our score text in the middle of the center of the top. We've got our player icon and the sliders, the health and ammo slider next to it are being linked to the upper left. We've got our enemy icon and its slider to the upper right, and then our pause button. So if we now go back to the game and change our orientation, we can see that with anchors alone, we now have become relatively, at least orientation independent at this point, purely by simply throwing in the anchors. Good point to pause. Looking over at the chat, what I'm reading is Indy Gandhi has asked, do you know a way to put away the canvas? My scene is centered on 0, 0, 0, and the canvas is a bit annoying when I'm trying to select a 3D object. You can turn the UI layer off, but you have to sort these into the UI layer. So you'd have to put the canvas onto the UI layer. Turn off the UI layer. Does that mean it becomes non-selectable? It's not something I do very often, to be honest. Let me go down to my player. Player, please. And let's try to get to a spot where my HUD canvas is in the way. Or maybe it's turned off. Layers. Turn on? Yeah, it is. Sorry, I just didn't know why I didn't. Oh, it's probably because I had it selected? I don't know. It looked like it was still there, but you can turn that on and off. You can put things on layers, and then you can turn those layers visibility off when you're editing. And I do believe if I click on this, I'm getting the paused canvas. So let's go ahead and turn that layer off and then click on this, and I'm getting, yeah, the stuff underneath it. So the UI layer should automatically be, the UI elements should automatically be placed on the UI layer. And then you can go to your layers up here next to your layouts and layers and simply turn UI layers off. Okay, I'm going to carry on. Looks like Matt's doing a good job. I hope that has answered the question about moving the UI out of the way. So if we go back and look at our game, and let's come up with a new resolution. Let's add one here. And let's call this one iPhone. Tall. And that's going to be, what are they? I'm trying to remember. 640 by 480, the old ones. You can correct me. 480 by 640. And I don't remember what iPhone 5s are off the top of my head either. And so now we can see that we have a bit of an issue. We've not changed our aspect ratio, but we've changed our resolution. We've now shrunk it down to that 480 by 640. And then if we made another one, let's call this one iPhone wide. And let's set that to 640 by 480. Oh, that did 64. Useful. So that's the right click to go ahead and edit and get the 0 in there. Okay, there we go. Again, we can see that as we go back and forth between these two, that our game isn't looking really the way we want it to. And what we can do with this is look at more true resolution independence. And there is quite a good bit of documentation on this. I'm going to go ahead and link this to you. So if we go into the documentation, not that page, and we look at the UI, and looking at the UI, we have a series of how-tos, including designing for multiple resolutions. This is done by the designers on their suggestion, very simple, straightforward page on designing for a UI for multiple resolutions. And the element that's behind this is the canvas scaler. Which I think is canvas scaler. There we go, canvas scaler. And this is the component that we're going to be using to help us be resolution independent. And the way we deal with this is we take our canvas. Here we got our HUD canvas. We add component. Luckily, I've already typed in the word canvas, so let's take that off. And we type in the word canvas, just so we can see it at the beginning of it, C-A-N-V. And there we can see our canvas component, canvas renderer, canvas group, canvas scaler. And we add the canvas scaler to it. And when looking at the canvas scaler, there are three modes. There is the, blow that up a little bit for you guys. And make it a little bit wider so you're not breaking there. We have constant pixel size, scale with screen, which is primarily what we're going to look at today, and constant physical size. Looking at constant pixel size, it'll make the UI elements retain the same pixels regardless of the screen size that you're on. When you have constant physical size, it's going to maintain the same physical size regardless of the screen size or resolution. And what we're going to be looking at is makes the UI elements bigger or smaller depending upon how the screen size is. Makes the UI elements bigger the bigger the screen is. Wonderful description. So we have our canvas scaler. We go to scale with screen size, and then we need to give a reference resolution. Now, all of this stuff is actually rather clever maths that are going on under the hood that are affecting the scale and the width and height of our rect transform of the object to keep everything laid out perfectly fine. And remember, our original one was 1024, and then we have 768. Now, if we take a look, 640 by 480 and iPad. Everything looks right. Can anyone spot something that isn't working? Well, the problem that we have is we actually have two canvases. So we've got our HUD canvas and we have our disabled canvas because we have our pause menu on a separate canvas. So with the pause menu on the separate canvas, we have to remember to add the canvas scaler to both of them, and we're going to set them the same to scale with screen, and the reference resolution again, 1024 by 768. Now that starts to look pretty good, don't it? So let's test it out. Whoops, come back to our game. So that works fine when we change our resolutions between the iPhone wide and our iPad landscape. And it looks good when we're in iPad portrait, a little bit, and iPhone tall. So something's not working quite right, is it? When we're looking at this, we need to look at our screen match mode. We've set our reference resolution, but what the maths are comparing is the difference in size between the resolution and the orientation and the aspect ratio. So if our original reference resolution is 1024, and then we go to iPad portrait, where we have 768 in the X, we are now going to be adjusting that scale. Then again, 640 and 480. So it's going to be looking at the 1024, 768, 480, and 640 and adjusting that all back to the 1024 because it has to compare one number, the width or the height. I'll talk about expand and shrink later. Now, the other option we can look at is just compare the width rather than the height with this slider going the other way. That doesn't work very well either. The best place to set both of these is in the middle at 0.5. And what's going to happen here is it's going to take the width and the height and compare that to the width and the height of the new screen layout. And it's going to be looking at, with equal weight, both the width and the height. And since we have the same aspect ratio and essentially the same resolution, only a different orientation, whoops, come back here. Now with that set up, we can change between our iPad landscape and portrait, and it stays the same. As a matter of fact, it'll look exactly like the one with just the anchors. And it also works when we go from tall to wide. We now have a relatively effective method of dealing with at least resolution independence, if not device independence. Now, when you're looking at this particular setup, if you have expand and shrink, it tries to make sure that with expand that the screen never gets smaller than the reference resolution. With shrink, tries to make sure it never gets larger than the reference resolution. And those are primarily for when you have a static background. Maybe say you have a 2D background in a game, you've got a single background that is the background for the entire game, and you don't want to go off the edges of that background. You'd use expand, you'd use shrink. They are relatively small use case, and for what we're doing here today, we're going to stick with match width or height, or in our case, 50% of both. Now, I'm seeing a question from someone whose name I'm finding hard to pronounce. Good guess, Kastraken says, now you're adjusting the screen size in Unity. What about the deployed Android app? Does it change with mobile device screen size, or do you recompile the version for each size? I'll get to this. Device independence. There are a couple of things about device independence. In many cases, especially when dealing with mobile, you don't have a choice as to what you want to set your screen size to. When we look at bringing up the build settings, and looking at our player settings, and looking at our mobile devices, a lot of that is dealt with inside the device, is that you can pick the orientation, but the device itself is going to be dictating what its screen size is going to be. And we can start to predict that. Let's go ahead and swap over to iOS. and pray to the cache server gods. Yay, we're in iOS, thanks to cache server. There we go. And we can now test this. We should be able to, by looking at our devices. And you can see that, again, inside the editor, it's just picking 320 by 480, and that's gone down. There's the iPhone. iPhone 5 also works all right. You can see it's a lot longer and thinner. And this is to a degree where you have to start testing your own game for device independence, because a game will look slightly different and play slightly different on different devices. And if you were playing a game and somebody was using perhaps maybe one of these super wide iPhones, so let's call that the iPhone 6 Plus, and we want that to be, what is it? It is 1920 by 1080, isn't it? If I remember correctly, it's a full 1920 by 1080 there. And then we try to get the most of it. We're going to stick to the same, this should be the same aspect ratio within the realm of, let me just sort of separate this off. Come on, game, you can do it. Where'd you go? There we go. We're coming close. And, you know, perhaps if someone has a very wide device, they're going to see more to the edges. And if someone felt that that was an unfair advantage, you may need to go in and find some way to letterbox your game. And I'm not sure whether even the whether the apps, I haven't looked into whether app stores will do that, but you have to be aware that if somebody has a device with a different aspect ratio, your game will look slightly different and will play slightly different on those different devices, because the camera is pretty much going to be filling that device. We can anchor our UI elements to edges, to corners, to arbitrary points anywhere inside the canvas. We can test how they work. I'm gonna move this back. Actually, I'm gonna go back to POW. Let's go back to our tutorial layout and pick the resolution. So when you're dealing with other devices, the best you can really do is test your all of the different devices that you can, and if there isn't one on the list, make your own, and make sure that your game plays as well as it possibly can. To get truly into device independence, you actually have to also start testing the device itself. This is where I want to get into something called platform defines. I think we can just find this with defines. Lots of defines here. Platform dependent compilation. This is the important one. And I think I may, sorry guys, reduce this a little bit just so we can see more on the page. Now, platform dependent compilation is the beginning of scripting where you can make definitions inside your scripts that can execute bits of code based on platform or device. And you can also do custom defines yourself as well. But the platform dependent compilation, you can define whether you're in the editor, whether you're in a phone, whether you're an Android, whether you're an Xbox. You can also define what version of Unity you're in. They haven't updated this. This also will continue scrolling for 4.6 and 5 and that sort of thing. And when you write your code, you can actually say, let's get to C#. If this is the Unity editor, then run this code. If it's the Unity iPhone, then run this code. So you can start to wrap up bits of code which will include enabling and disabling UI elements based on the platform that you're on. An example of that would be, what would happen if this works? This game works fine. It's meant for keyboard and mice. It's meant for PC web-based input. Arguably consoles, because you could probably get that through your controller. But this game doesn't work with mobile in mind unless you do some modifications. So let's say we went to our sample assets and we took our cross-platform input and we went to our prefabs, and I'm not going to hook this up completely, but so you'll get the idea. And then I grabbed, I want a single stick controller. And with the sample assets, if you look at the cross-platform input guides, it's turned off right now because we're in the editor. We can test it by turning it back on again. I'm going to enable mobile input. But we can see when the mobile input is on, this should pop up. Yeah, there we go. We now have a jump button and a joystick. Now this jump button and joystick, we don't want to see. As a matter of fact, it's going to conflict potentially with the layout that we've designed for our standalone, where we've conveniently stuck this pause button down here in the corner. Well, now we're going to want to have these elements only, these touch elements only show up when we're running our mobile device. And we may want to move the position of the gear icon when we're running our mobile device. And in this case, we need to get into coding and scripting on a per platform level, and on a and potentially you can detect what device you're on a per device level. When looking at you can look this up in the documentation, is that you can, I know at least you can do this for iPhone. I'm not quite sure whether you can do this for Android. You can poll the device, find out which device it is, and then you can make decisions on your UI when the game starts up. You can put this stuff in a wake and say, turn on these elements, turn off these other elements. Let me see if I can bring that script up. I want to bring this up, which is the cross-platform input. This is highly over scripted for what you need to do, because this is meant to be a generic drag and drop situation. And it gets into very complicated scripting, but essentially it boils down to this. You know, if you're using mobile input, then we want to run our mobile input, or else we just want to go ahead and run whatever else we want to. So you can run this. If it's iPhone, then run this bit, or else do something else. And the type of code that you can put in there could include deactivating the UI element, setting the game object to be inactive. If you completely want to get rid of it, you could say on startup, if Unity iPhone, then enable the joystick, enable the jump pad, and destroy the options button, and it will go away as long as you don't have any dependencies on it. It'll just go away, and it won't be there when you run the game. And as a matter of fact, in many cases, if you write it correctly, you may even get it so it doesn't compile. So when you're dealing with true device independence, you have to move away from simple components that we have here in the UI tools for making ourselves resolution independent, and for making ourselves orientation independent, and move into the realm of being a device independent. So, and I wanted to leave some time for Q&A. Sorry to rush through it. I always feel that I'm rushing at the end to get into really showing off the scripting of this, and I sort of have to put that back on you to look at the platform dependent compilation and looking at defines and if-defs inside your scripts, but at least it gives you a direction to go and a place to get started. I'd like to throw it over for Q&A and see what we can do between Matt and myself to answer your questions. So Boya Grandma says, I'd love to see ways to swap resolutions of textures for the drastically different devices. Well, you can out of the box with platforms. That's certainly true. If we look at, say, our demo art, and we look at our icon, we have here our platform override. So for by default, this gear icon is being brought in at a max size of 1024 and a format of true color. When we go to iPhone, if we choose to override it, we could then say, I would like this one to be 512 max size. I mean, I think the reality of it, it's only 64 by 64. So let's be brutal and say I want this to be 32 by, even smaller, and I would like it to be compressed. And now when I am my build target is iOS, it'll take that 64 by image and bring it down to a 32 by image, and it will compress it with, at this point, with PBRTC to 4 bits. And it'll be 0.5K. Whereas if we made it true color, we can see it'd be 4K. It's not a huge saving, not a huge cost to begin with, but you can certainly reduce it quite a bit, even more, by making it compressed. So you can set all of these up in the importer for any one of your bits of artwork. You can override for any particular platform. If you want to get into something different, where it's you have one resolution for, say, an iPad 1 and another resolution for, say, an iPad Air, then you would need to include both of those textures inside your project and inside your assets, and make sure that they're referenced. And then you would need to poll the device, and when you were starting your game, so the scene would start and you would say, I don't know, I have an airplane game or a tank game, and if I'm on the iPad Air, I want to load a 1K texture for all of my airplanes and for all of my ships. And if I'm on an iPad 1, I'm going to use 256K. And so you poll for the device, find out what device it is, and you change that in your scripting. This could also be true for your geometry. I had a game that just crashed the iPad 1 because the models were just too high res. But worked fine on all other devices. And so I had to simply write a trap before it brought that in and said, hey, what model are we using? Hey, if it's on an iPad 1, can't use that model. Got to use one that's been depolygonized a little bit. Boyo Grandma asks again, is there any kind of documentation to describe that technique you just mentioned? It's general coding. I mean, yeah, I mean, scripting API. Welcome to the scripting reference renderer. All has to do with your renderer. Now, when we're looking at an object, speaking of which, pause menu's in the way. Who was mentioning that? So let's turn off our UI layer. Oop, gone. And click on. Oh, that worked very nicely, didn't it? Wasn't that just what we talked about? Turning off the UI layer so we can touch our object. Now, when we look at the hearse, it has a mesh renderer. That's this guy here. And our mesh renderer has a material, and that material has a texture. As you can see, there's our texture there. And that texture obviously is referring to a diffuse, and we also have a normal map. And if we want to refer to that in our scripting, we're talking about our renderer, and we have a choice of material or multiple materials, because you can have multiple materials on an object. So you're going to reference multiple materials. You also could be using shared materials. And I'm not going to go into complete detail because it depends how you set up your object, but this is a way to get started, and then you can practice this, do some Googling, ask some more questions if you get stuck. And then the material is going to have, not materials, because I want to show you the material. We'll have a reference to, I thought we could see more here, materials color. We've got to go up to the material. So let me give you some quick bits here. So there's our renderer. And then our renderer's material, which if we see here is a renderer's material, that's a variable that refers to a type, and the type is material. And that material type will maintain information about its color, about its main texture. So we can, in code, say, I would like the renderer's material color to be red. And when we write this in a script, you know, on start, I mean, I void example, I would also say you could make that start and it would happen on start. It will then suddenly take your main color and put the color picker on the other window, take the main color and turn it to red, because you're accessing the material's red color. You can also get the main texture. So if you had and I'll link you this doc. So if you had a reference to you'd want two textures, your high-res texture and your low-res textures, public texture, high-res texture, public texture, low-res texture, and then say if it's any one of these devices, the texture needs on the main texture needs to be high-res, or else make it low-res. I mean, and arguably you could also do some stuff on the fly. I've seen games that will look, say, for performance, and if performance is dropping, it will reduce the amount of how far you can see in the game and up the fog level so that you can't see where the geometry goes. And so dynamically, you know, keep the game running fast. You could have a point where you're saying, hey, if my game slows down to a certain point, swap out all the textures from high res to low res, see if that makes a difference, and see if you can keep your performance up. But then you will see that in your game. So a lot of this is balancing what's going to look good in your game and what isn't. Arguably, on a lower resolution device, they won't necessarily see those high-res textures, so you should be safe. Dialert says, but doesn't that load two textures? Arguably, yes. You can get into manually removing and destroying stuff. You can also get into a resources folder, and you can start loading things from resources as well, so that you just load the one that you need. Yes, if you took a public reference to each one, you would be loading them. You could also do something where you keep both textures in your resources folder. Both textures are available in your project, and then you hard load the texture, but you will have to take the time to go and get it. Your computer will take the time and go and get it. Best to bring it into once you know what textures you want, definitely bring them into your project and then reference them so they stay in your project so you don't go and reload them every time you need them. But there are ways that you can optimize that. Yes, Screen does know that. Screen. And you can look at Screen in a couple of ways. Current resolution. So there are a number, I mean, I haven't actually used a lot of these recently. So you want to take a look at these and give them a try. Height and width. You can set it. So Screen class should be helping you with that, and that should be, again, platform independent. You should be able to get your screen resolution any way that you want to. Michael Miko asks, do you know how I can script a drawing brush on a get button down? Take a look at the cursor and be aware that that this supports hardware cursors on OS X, Windows, Linux, and Flash. And Flash falls back to software cursors on unsupported platforms. There probably should be a comma there, I believe. I think this is supports hardware cursors on OS X, Windows, Linux, and Flash, comma, falls back to software cursors on unsupported platforms. And you can take a look at hardware cursors in general, just sort of start digging around inside cursors. And you can also Google hardware cursors. It was new in Unity 4. So it's relatively new, but it's been around for a couple of years now. And so you can set that so that when your mouse goes over certain things, it turns into a sword, other things, a mailed glove icon, into other things, a hand with burning flame. So you can set your hardware cursors. Moby in Yagoob asks, when I import a 2D sprite, it will not slice correctly. Sprite editor? Slice. This is, to me, slicing this sprite And that's a 9 slice there. This is the single, and I'm making this essentially set for 9 splices. I can set them down here. I can make it a 20 pixel border, right, left, bottom, and top. And so that's slicing it, and then I can apply that. Now, when we look back at the game, and we look at our enemy icon, right now this is set to simple. And if you want to see the slices, you need to set it to sliced. This image does not have a border. Did I slice the wrong one? I did slice the wrong one. Let me bring in the one I'm supposed to have sliced. That one. Bit funky. That border there, since we're 9 slicing, we're 9 slicing a circle. So you can see that the stretch is actually kind of funny because of the way that it's going on. But that is a 9 sliced sprite. So that worked for me. But the one thing I had to do is make sure that my image type was sliced. And I want to revert that. Sprite editor, please. Oop, wrong one. And then let's clear these out. So again, can you give me more information about what's not working right with that slice? Time's slipping away. I should wrap it up. It's already 20 minutes past. So any last questions? Using the new UI, if I use a canvas in world space mode, the text looks rough. Any tips? Yes. It has to do with scale versus size. And what I would suggest that you do is go to blogs.unity3d.com. Unity3D is the website, not the product. And then we look for UI. And world space camera. Come on, maybe it's world. Canvas, world. Let's say canvas. Limit the overview. New world space UI canvas. Take a look at how they built. This is a movie with Runa and Will. Runa is the man behind anchors and a lot of the UI, along with the rest of the UI team. And Will, who is oversees lots of content, including our esteemed learning. And see how they did that. And the big thing is that you need to deal with scale and size, whereas primarily what you want to do is leave your scale at 1:1 when dealing with UI elements that are in overlay canvases and screen space cameras and overlay and screen space. What's the other one? Gotta look. Can't remember. Canvas. So screen space camera and screen space overlay. You want to pretty much, unless you have a good reason to, leave your scale at 1 and deal with size. But when you're dealing with a world space canvas, what you need to bring your scale down. And I believe they're using a scale of 0.01. You'll have to look at the video. And then once it's small, you can then make your text big, because what happens is that when the canvas and everything is scaled at 1:1, it's large, like the full screen space overlay camera. And so then you need to reduce the font to being a really tiny font. And there's just not enough information. So you want to reduce the canvas, and with a small canvas, you can have a normally scaled typeface. And Gelatin Fox, yes, the old UI system will continue to work. Everything all the way back to UI text, GUI text, and GUI textures will work. On GUI will work. And also don't forget that all editor scripting is going to be done in on GUI and on editor GUI. So you will definitely, if you get into modifying the editor, you'll need to know how that system works. And it will work fine. There's many good reasons for wanting to have an immediate mode UI. So don't discount it for making some very quick UIs, especially for testing. It's fantastic. Don't discount on GUI. It's not obsolete. We've just improved in-game UIs with this new UI tools that we're working with in 4.6. So I need to wrap it up. I guess it's thanks for coming time. Follow us at Unity 3D, at the Ant Ranch. That's me, at Will Goldstone, at Matt Mirrorfish, who was in here earlier today, Matt Shell, and at Mike Geig, who we should see later on this month doing Merry Fragmas? I can't remember. Something about frags, first-person shooters, and Christmas. Merry Frag Fest. You'll find it on the website. Also, if you need to, you can find us on the Unity forums under teaching. There's a live training thread, so you can leave comments, criticisms, suggestions, things you liked, things you hate, things you want to see. You can leave there for us, and we will get to them. We do have an ongoing list. We try to do this at least once a week. And if you have something you're really missing, go ahead and tell us. Glad you liked it. I'm glad it was useful. I'm going to go off mic. I'll be in chat probably for the next 5 minutes, and then about 5:30 I really got to go. So talk to you later. Thanks for coming. See you next week.